Final Score here on your Wednesday. Glad you could join us here on GCI Cable Channel 19 and Broadcast Channel 35. Final Score, as usual, brought to you in part by Diet and Company of Keller Williams Realty and also by Affordable Used Cars. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the Chicago Bulls now getting in the, I guess you can call it, the love triangle, getting in the running for Kevin Love, the Minnesota Timberwolves power forward, and how that affects Cleveland. We'll also talk about LeBron James and his so-called, I guess, kind of an apology, kind of make up for things with his neighbors there in Akron, Ohio. We'll also talk about Mike Tyson and how he and Evander Holyfield are getting together. Kind of interesting. And we'll also have Are You Kidding Me? We flash back to Mark Sanchez eating a hot dog on the sideline of a football game during a football game, nevertheless. Anyway, so we start things off with the Chicago Bulls making a push for Kevin Love, and it seemed like this was going to be a foregone conclusion, and still many of the NBA analysts predict that the Cleveland Cavaliers still will wind up with Kevin Love. But now the Chicago Bulls, who have been talking to the Minnesota Timberwolves about Kevin Love over the past couple of weeks, have made things more intriguing, that is for sure. Many people around the league feel like this is just more of a ploy for Minnesota to get more from Cleveland in return, but I don't know if that's the case necessarily. I get the feeling that the Minnesota Timberwolves, it has been a long time, such a long time since they have won and made the playoffs. They want to win right now. I don't know if the pieces that Cleveland would give them would let them win right now. Sure, everybody keeps talking about Andrew Wiggins being a part of this trade, potentially from Cleveland to Minnesota. But he's a rookie. He's not going to be that big of a difference maker. Who are you going to get to replace Kevin Love in his production? The Chicago Bulls at least can offer some guys to replace that production of Kevin Love and at least make the Minnesota Timberwolves competitive. There's talk that Taj Gibson and Jimmy Butler would be part of the trade if Chicago did get a deal done with the Minnesota Timberwolves. Both of those guys, defensive specialists. Not guys that are going to put up a lot of points. Every once in a while, you'll see them put up, 20, 25 points in a game. But that's not an everyday thing. They're out there for defensive purposes. But if Taj Gibson went to Minnesota, that would at least replace a little bit of the production from Kevin Love of what they would be missing. And also think about this. How the Chicago Bulls would look with Kevin Love in the lineup. That team just went from being picked third in the Eastern Conference to the top of the conference. You have Joakim Noah, Derrick Rose, Kevin Love. I mean, look at that lineup. Then you throw in Doug McDermott in there, probably coming off the bench this year. Oh, that could be deadly. But for Minnesota, they're kind of in an interesting spot. They have to make a decision. They have to make it quickly because Kevin Love could opt out of the contract, and Minnesota may not get anything for Kevin Love. If Kevin Love opted out before the trade deadline and said, you know what, I'm done, I'm just going to go to Cleveland or Chicago or wherever, Minnesota has to make up its mind. Time is not on their side. So I would expect a deal to be done and in place, either with Chicago or with Cleveland. And my gut tells me 80% chance that Kevin Love will go to Cleveland. But it is intriguing, however, what the Chicago Bulls can offer to the Minnesota Timberwolves to at least make them more competitive than they would be if they were to trade right now with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Obviously, the biggest player that the Timberwolves would be getting would be Andrew Wiggins. And my thing is, he's not a bad player. He did a lot of great things in college at the University of Kansas, but he's not proven himself in the NBA. You can't put the weight of a team that hasn't made the playoffs in years on a rookie. You can't. You can't push all the chips into the middle of the table and say, here we go. We're putting everybody on your back. You got to carry us, young fella. It's not going to work. At least if they were to trade with the Chicago Bulls, if their goal is to be competitive right now, this year, potentially get in as a 6th, 7th, or 8th seed in the Western Conference, then they make the trade with the Chicago Bulls. If their logic and thinking is, hey, we want to build for the future, and maybe in 2 to 3 years, we make a run for the playoffs, then they trade with the Cleveland Cavaliers. You can get Andrew Wiggins. You can build through the draft. You can acquire other players. And I think that's the route they're going to go. Even though they have not been competitive in the past few years, at least making the playoffs anyway, I think they see the value, long-term value, if they were to trade with the Cleveland Cavaliers. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But the Chicago Bulls, I guess, kind of came out of nowhere. They were talking with Minnesota. And that was no. And talks have kind of cooled off a little bit. And now they've picked back up, and things are becoming a little bit more interesting. And time is not on the side of the Minnesota Timberwolves. They have to make a decision quickly. But there was also a chance that he could go to Golden State. Golden State's kind of fallen off the pace a little bit in what they were offering because they don't want to give up Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson was supposed to be part of the deal from Golden State, but they think, having him there obviously is much more valuable than trading him away to a Western Conference rival and having him come back to haunt them. So I don't see that happening with the Golden State Warriors. It comes down to Chicago and Cleveland. It'll be interesting to see exactly what happens. Man, if he went to Chicago, though, that would be a defensive juggernaut. A team that relies on defense and not giving up a lot of points. Kevin Love, not only a great offensive player, but he can play some defense as well. Just think of the Joakim Noah, Derrick Rose, Kevin Love. Ooh, it could be good times in Chicago, just like the mid-'90s. Anyway, we'll take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk about LeBron James and his apology, so-called apology. Should he have done it? And it was interesting that the way he did it to his neighbors there in Akron, Ohio, when he came back, it made his decision to come back to Cleveland and play for the Cavaliers. Anyway, you're watching Final Score. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after the break.